I'd barely stepped off the curb outside the naval hall when the security officer lifted a hand to stop me. He checked his clipboard, then met my eyes. Polite, firm. "Ma'am, your name isn't on the list." It shouldn't have stung, but the real cut was the smirk from my father a few feet away. He leaned toward another officer and said, just loud enough for me to hear, "She's not even invited." My heart thudded, not from embarrassment but from a familiar ache I'd lived with my whole life. The ocean air was crisp, the kind of day that should have felt celebratory. Instead, I was standing at the gate to my father's retirement ceremony and my brother's promotion, being told I didn't belong. Through the doors I could see Ethan inside, shaking hands, the golden boy in spotless dress whites soaking in applause. My father's gaze slid past me like I was any other face in the crowd, not his daughter. That was the story they'd written for me years ago. The afterthought, the one who didn't fit the family's idea of a real naval officer. That story wasn't true anymore. What no one here knew, not my father, not my brother, not the rows of decorated guests, was that I had been promoted to Rear Admiral 2 weeks earlier. The Navy kept it quiet until the official release. I'd kept it quieter from my family. I felt the cold edge of my ID in my hand and made a decision. I wasn't going to argue my way in. I wasn't going to beg for a seat. I would walk in on my terms, wearing the truth on my shoulders where no one could ignore it. And when I did, there would be no mistaking exactly who I was. I grew up in Coronado, where the wind carried taps across the water and service wasn't just respected, it was expected. My father, Captain Owen Quinn, could fill a room without raising his voice. Discipline. Tradition. Command forged on a bridge with salt air in your face. My brother fit that vision from the start. Loud. Athletic. Born to wear a uniform. I was different. Books over ball games. Puzzles over parades. While Ethan was on a field winning trophies, I was at my desk learning ciphers and tracing battle maps with a ruler. My father never scolded me for it, but there was a distance in his eyes when he looked my way. He valued victories you could photograph. I collected quiet wins he never seemed to notice. Family gatherings put that gap under a spotlight. When Ethan got into the academy, our backyard turned into a parade route, grills smoking, veterans swapping sea stories, and my father smiling like the war was already won. My name is Mara Quinn, United States Navy. And today I wasn't the afterthought. 3 days earlier, I'd taken first place in a national cyber defense exercise. When I mentioned it at dinner, my father nodded once and said, "That's nice, Mara, but it's not a commission." It wasn't just the words. It was the pattern. Photos where I was cropped at the edge. Holiday toasts that skipped my name. Stories about the Quinn family's real naval legacy that somehow always ended with Ethan. There's one moment I'll never forget. I was home on leave the year I made lieutenant commander. My father was in the kitchen with an old shipmate, not knowing I was in the hall. "Mara's smart," he said. "But she's not a war fighter." My promotion orders were still in my bag. That was when I understood how deep his definition of worth ran. He didn't mean it cruelly. To him, leadership meant the front line, not a quiet room filled with glowing screens and locked files. So I stopped waiting for his recognition. I built a career that didn't require it. That choice was lonely. When the people closest to you never see the whole of who you are, you learn to carry yourself. But without their expectations, I had freedom. I didn't need to compete with Ethan in his arena. I had my own battlefield, a quieter one, more complex, requiring a different kind of strength. When I joined the Navy, I didn't march toward the spotlight. I stepped into the shadows. Intelligence. Precision over parade drills. Work you can't explain at a barbecue because the details live behind doors with codes on them. My first billet was a tactical data team aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt. I learned to spot threats before they formed. Patterns no one else noticed. They started calling me Watchtower. I was promoted ahead of schedule not because I was loud but because I was right. One of my early major operations was Iron Shield. We intercepted chatter pointing to a cyber breach against a carrier strike group, an attack that could have crippled navigation on a ship carrying more than 5,000 souls. My team worked 36 hours straight, laying countermeasures the attackers never saw. The carrier sailed on like nothing happened. No headlines. Just a quiet handshake from an admiral in a secure room with no cameras. Then came Midnight Falcon. Intel flagged an unmarked freighter in the Pacific carrying radioactive material. Within hours, I coordinated a joint op with the Australian Navy and MI6. We boarded in international waters, neutralized the threat, and prevented a crisis no one will ever read about. I watched the sun rise over open water and felt no need for my name in print. There's another mission that still sits in the quiet corners of my mind. Silent Echo. A SEAL team was pinned in hostile terrain, comms jammed, extraction window closing. I rerouted a surveillance satellite from another theater and opened them a corridor they could trust. They made it home. No one mentioned my name. No one asked how it happened. That's the nature of the work. If you succeed, someone else gets the credit. If you fail, you may never get the chance to explain. My promotions came quickly. Ethan got glossy photos in the Christmas card. I got a 2-line mention. If that. At 37 I wore a star. Rear Admiral, pinned in a private ceremony with a handful of senior officers. No champagne. No press. The orders were effective immediately. The story was not for public release. I walked out of that room knowing my own family still thought I pushed paper in an office. They had no idea I oversaw live operations across multiple continents. That I briefed leaders who trusted me with decisions measured in human lives. In their minds, I was a supporting role in the Quinn family saga. Someone who wrote reports while Ethan did the real work. It was a strange mix of pride and restraint. I knew what I'd achieved. I knew the disasters we'd diverted, the lives that existed because my team did its job. But most victories lived in rooms without windows. I carried medals I couldn't display and commendations that stayed locked in a safe. My career was built on silence, and that silence became a second skin. Still, moments pierced through. A handwritten note from a 4-star thanking me for sustained meritorious service of the highest caliber. A quiet salute from a SEAL I'd helped without ever meeting. Those mattered more than applause. They proved the work counted, even if no one outside those walls would ever know. I didn't hide any of it from my family out of spite. I just stopped expecting them to understand. They measured service by what they could see. Mine was built to be invisible. Over the years, I wondered if staying invisible had become too easy, and I knew there would come a day when the truth would walk into the room whether anyone was ready for it or not. That day was bright and sharp, the kind of spring morning that feels ceremonial. I arrived early in a tan trench, dark slacks, simple blouse, just another face in the stream at the entrance. My dress whites were folded in a garment bag in the back seat, pressed to perfection, the single silver star still wrapped in cloth. At the gate, the young security officer checked the tablet, then turned it so I could see. My father, my mother, Ethan Quinn and his wife. No Mara Quinn. I thanked him and stepped aside, watching guests flow past. For a moment I considered leaving, letting the story continue without me like always. But hearing the low hum of voices and the distant laughter from inside, something in me refused to fade again. This was my family's event. But it was also my career, my life, my name. I walked back to the lot, steady, like pacing for a race I'd waited years to run. Sun flashed off the chrome as I opened the trunk. I lifted the garment bag with both hands, unzipped it with deliberate care. The whites caught the light, every crease sharp. I dressed piece by piece, fastening each button like sealing years of work, sacrifice and silence into place. The star came last. One polished point carrying the weight of everything I'd done and everything they'd chosen not to see. I pinned it and felt the shift, not just in how I looked but in how I stood. In the driver's seat I checked the mirror. The woman staring back was the same one who'd spent years in secure rooms, absent from photos and toasts. But now she was visible, undeniable, impossible to edit out. I stepped out. Heels on pavement, steady and sure. I wasn't walking in to cause a scene or demand an apology. I was walking in to take my place, not as daughter or sister, but as Rear Admiral Mara Quinn, United States Navy, and they were about to see her for the first time. The corridor to the banquet hall was lined with portraits in gold braid, eyes forward as if guarding the room beyond. I passed without slowing, cover tilted just above my brow, the weight of the star both grounding and lifting me. Inside, a string ensemble finished a soft thread of Anchors Away, notes weaving through quiet conversations. I stepped into the back of the hall just as the MC's voice rose on the microphone. Will all Quinn family officers please take the front row? Chairs shifted. Heads turned toward the usual few. Then someone noticed the white uniform in the aisle. A ripple moved through the crowd as a SEAL caught sight of me. His eyes widened. His voice cut cleanly through the murmur. Rear Admiral Quinn, front row. It started with him, then the men beside him, then an entire section. The sound rolled across the room like a charge. 300 seals rose in perfect unison. Chairs scraped against polished floor. Medals flashed beneath the lights. Back straight. Arms at their sides. Rear Admiral Quinn, front row. I didn't rush. I didn't wave. I didn't acknowledge my father, Captain Owen Quinn, frozen mid-toast, or the blank disbelief on Ethan's face. My heels clicked steadily as the aisle opened, the crowd parting like it had been rehearsed. The MC faltered, microphone dipping, his words swallowed by the disciplined roar of recognition. I passed table after table. Vice admirals, commanders, young ensigns barely out of the academy, watching not because I demanded it but because I'd earned it. Those seals weren't standing out of politeness. They knew my name from briefings that never saw daylight. Some of them had walked away from missions they might not have survived without my team. My father's glass hung in midair, his eyes locked on mine with something I couldn't read. My mother's hands were pressed to her chest. Ethan's expression was a snarl of confusion, and something close to fear. I kept my gaze forward. This wasn't the time for explanations. At the front row, the officers there stepped aside without a word. I took my seat, set my cover neatly in my lap, and folded my hands. The MC cleared his throat, voice unsteady as he caught up. Ladies and gentlemen, Rear Admiral Mara Quinn. Applause washed out, scattered at first, then building, but the moment had already landed. For the first time in my life, the room didn't look past me. It didn't crop me out. It didn't rewrite the story. I didn't need to say a thing. Everything necessary sat on my shoulders in a single silver star, and in the silence that followed. When the program ended, the hall dissolved into clusters of conversation. I stayed seated a beat, letting the hum pass through me. One by one, senior officers stepped away from their circles and approached. A vice admiral with a chest full of ribbons shook my hand and said quietly, "Good to finally put a face to the name." Others followed. Nods, handshakes, words meant only for me. No one asked for details. They already knew what they needed to know. Ethan appeared at my side, his expression still trying to catch up to the last hour. "How long have you been keeping this a secret?" His voice was low, careful. 15 years, I said. He blinked, let out a breath, and nodded. For a moment it looked like he might say more, but he stepped back instead. My father was the last to approach. He didn't speak. He just stood there, taking me in, jacket lines, the star, the ribbons. Finally he gave a single, slow nod. Not an apology. Not even close. But it was something I had never seen from him. Acknowledgement that words couldn't carry. I didn't need him to say he was proud. In that quiet nod, for the first time, he truly saw me. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. It didn't erase the years of being overlooked. But it closed a distance that had been there as long as I could remember. As the room thinned and the glassware stopped chiming, I stayed a moment longer. The moment had passed, but the change felt permanent. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I had walked in on my terms, and I would leave the same way. 6 months later, I pulled into my parents' driveway. Same brick house that had weathered deployments, homecomings, and farewells. Inside, the smell of my mother's roast filled the hall, warm, familiar. I paused at the display cabinet. Front and center, where Ethan's academy photo used to sit, was one of my medals. Ribbon laid just so, silver catching the light. Dinner felt different. My father asked about the logistics of a recent operation. Not vague politeness but real curiosity. My mother wanted to know what it was like to lead a command team scattered across continents. Even Ethan, fork hovering, asked how I handle the pressure of knowing lives hang on my calls. No teasing. No quick pivot. They listened. After dessert, Ethan lingered while our parents cleared the table. "I always thought I had to stay ahead of you," he said quietly. "I didn't want to be the brother who couldn't keep up." He looked down, then met my eyes. "Turns out I never could, and that's okay." I smiled, not to brush it off but because I finally understood we'd been carrying different weights the whole time. Driving home in the dark, I thought about the medal in their cabinet. It was recognition, yes. But it wasn't what made me feel whole. That happened months earlier when I walked into that hall. Not for them but for myself. I took my place without waiting for permission. No nod, no question, no medal could give me that. The road unspooled ahead, the engine a steady hum. And I realized the most important acknowledgement had never been theirs to give. It had been mine all along. And I had finally claimed it.